Mrs. Maria Mavris, who has already introduced herself, who works at the EMA Patient Relations, Public and Stakeholder Engagement Department. Maria, please, when you would be ready to share your screen.
Thank you. I'll do that now. I hope you can all see that.
We can perfectly.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Isabel, also for explaining. So what I will do in this first part of the presentation is I will just introduce you to EMA and what we do in the agency, who we are and who we work with. And then I'll take you through the first step of how patients are involved at EMA. And then just to keep you on your toes and keep you awake, we'll go to a little quiz just to make sure that you've integrated some of the knowledge before we then have questions, or we can do it at the same time. I'll leave that up to Isabel. So to go to the first slide. Oh, okay. I saw someone's already answering the poll and I was very confused. So, okay, so who is the European Medicines Agency? So I'll start off with what we do. And very broadly, of course, it's a lot more complicated, but what we do is we really facilitate the development and access to medicines. We evaluate applications for marketing authorization, monitor the safety of the medicines while they're being developed, but also once they're on the market. And you'll hear more about that from Dr. Strauss later today. And we also provide reliable information on human and also veterinary medicine. So it's important to remember that EMA is not only for human medicines, but also for veterinary medicines as well. So very broadly, facilitating development, evaluating the applications and monitoring the safety and providing valuable information. So who do we work with? So EMA was established in 1995 and currently we have about 800 staff members. We did lose a few in the move from London to Amsterdam, but we are also now building up with new colleagues such as Julia. We work with experts from across Europe. So people in your countries and EU member states will be contributing to the work of EMA via the scientific committees or different ways that experts can participate. So we have 7 scientific committees. 6 of them are for human medicines. And I apologize for the acronyms, and we are an agency full of acronyms. But just very broadly, this is the Committee for Human Medicinal Products and the Committee for Veterinary Medicinal Products. The COMP is for orphan medicines. HMPC is for herbal medicines. The PDCO is for pediatric medicines. CAT is for advanced therapies, and the PRAC is for the pharmacovigilance and risk assessment, or the safety committee. So these are the committees that meet every month and evaluate and discuss the dossiers. We have a management board where all the 27 member states are represented. We also have 4 civil society representatives on the management board, along with European Commission and European Parliament representatives. So the EMA is just one part of the larger European medicines regulatory network. We are one of the functioning pieces within this medicines regulatory network. So as I said, we already work with all of the national competent authorities or the medicines agencies around Europe, and their experts come to be members of the scientific committees. So the regulatory network is really, as I said, the national regulatory authorities, along with EMA and the European Commission, who plays a very important role. So the EMA was established, as I said, in 1995 in order to really make the evaluation and authorization of medicines much more streamlined, much faster, in order to benefit patients. The procedure that existed before that, I will just name one of them, is indicated here on the right, the national procedures, where a medicine can be licensed in a particular member state. Now, the centralized procedure, which is via EMA, is a centralized authorization, which means that it's one application, which is assessed centrally at the EMA via the committees. And then it issues one marketing authorization that's valid for all 27 member states at the same time. And the information is then produced in the different languages as well. So this is the difference. It makes it much easier than a company going to individual countries and requesting marketing authorization. Also, It means that for some of the countries with the smaller populations where possibly a company might not have wanted to go there, there's already a marketing authorization via the centralized procedure that allows the company to market in that member state. Now, which medicines are actually approved via the EMA, because it's not all medicines, but it's medicines that fit under these categories. So of course, for some medicines, companies still do need to go via the individual member state, the individual authorization. So for the medicines that are mandatory to come to EMA, these include medicines for the treatment of HIV/AIDS, cancer, diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases, autoimmune, other immune dysfunctions, viral diseases, biotech such as the advanced therapies, gene therapies, somatic or tissue therapy, and of course medicines for rare diseases are also obligated to come through the EMA. You cannot use the individual member state, the national procedures. What EMA does not do, and this is also very important because we do get a lot of questions, particularly about the pricing or the availability of the medicines. So EMA does not is not responsible for the pricing of medicines or the availability in a particular country. It doesn't authorize clinical trials. We're not responsible for advertising or patents. Medical devices is an interesting one because our remit has now been enlarged, and so medical devices in combination with a medicine are now being looked at by EMA, but we're really at the early stages of that, so I'd rather not really discuss that today. Homeopathic medicines, food supplements and cosmetics, and the development of treatment guidelines, these do not fall under the EMA remit. So I think this is very important to remember. What I've done here is I've also linked this document. You'll be getting the slides after this presentation. So there's a document called From Laboratory to Patient, and it's the journey of a medicine assessed by EMA. And this is a very nice interactive document. You can either look at it online or you can look at it as a PDF, and it does give you a lot of information about the different steps, more information. And I see that that Isabel kindly linked all the existing EMA videos to your agenda. These are a little out of date from the point of view of visuals, but the information is still valid. So that kind of concludes the introduction to the EMA. So hopefully you've understood that we have 7 committees. 6 of them work with human medicines. 1 of them works with the veterinary medicines. We have committees that cover every aspect of the medicines process or pathway through the EMA, and I'll show you more about that in a moment. That we monitor the safety of medicines throughout its life cycle, and that we are not responsible for certain things, but that there are medicines that are mandatory, absolutely compulsory, that they only receive their licensing. They can only receive their licensing through the EMA process. So to give you a little bit of information now about how EMA started interacting with patients and where that journey has taken us. So once again, EMA opened its doors in 1995, and pretty much immediately the patients came and asked to speak to members of the EMA. And this was at the time that was the peak of the HIV/AIDS crisis, well, probably a little bit after the peak, but still the HIV/AIDS advocates were incredibly active and came to EMA and wanted to speak to us in the same way that they had spoken to the FDA many years before, or a few years before. So that was really where the patient dialogue was initiated. And then from there, rare disease advocates became very active, and of course cancer as well. And these are really the 3 main big groups that pushed forward patient advocacy, at least in Europe. So in 2000, patients became members of a committee. So prior to that, with the CHMP, the human medicinal products, there weren't any patients as full members of the committee, but with the creation of the orphan committee for rare diseases, patients for the first time took their place as members of the committee with full voting rights and able to receive all the information and be involved in discussions and around the evaluation of medicines requesting an orphan designation. As the evolution of interactions with patients continued, we had created a working group of patients and consumers, which then was formalized via the framework. So a framework of interaction with patients, consumers, and their organizations has existed since 2005. It was revised once in 2014, and we're currently in the process of revising it again, just to update with also the strategies, which I'll tell you a bit about in a moment. So then the working group changed into a working party, which officialized it a little bit more in 2006. A department, which I work for, which Julia and I are in, the public engagement or public and stakeholder engagement department, was created to really show the commitment of the agency in working with stakeholders, and the creation of the department really underpins that. Then, of course, in 2017, another landmark happened with the holding of public hearings, and we've had two so far. We had one on valproate-containing medicines, and then another one on quinolones and fluoroquinolones. And well, since then, we've also been in flux, as you probably understand, with the UK withdrawal from the European Union, then the obligation of the agency to move, and so we moved then to Amsterdam, and now, of course, we've also been quite busy with the COVID crisis as well. However, patient engagement has continued during this time and has always been a pillar and an important aspect of what we do as an agency. So we've obviously involved patients in the management of COVID, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And so as an ongoing activity, we continue and will always involve patients in the medicine's life cycle. So here I want to talk to you about the first of three ways that patients are involved at EMA. Now, either they represent, and what we talk about is the different way they represent. So they either represent their community, they represent their organization, or they represent themselves as individuals. Now, how patients represent the community is when they are members of the management board. They are there representing all EU patients. There's 2 members of the management board, or when they are members of the EMA committees. What's important to remember with the EMA committees is that they are nominated by the European Commission, not by EMA. So the European Commission makes the call when the time is due for the nomination of patients, and then you make your application to the European Commission, and then the European Commission will nominate the patients for a period of 3 years. So we currently have, ever since the orphan committee had the first patients, every subsequent committee that was created also has patients as full members. So the pediatric committee, the advanced therapy committee, and the safety committee, the PRAC, also have patients as full members. Interestingly, the last 3 committees, the pediatric committee, the advanced therapy, and the safety committee, also have members representing healthcare professionals across Europe. And this is very interesting as well. So this is it for the examples where patients represent their community. In the next example, we have where patients are representing their organizations. So here we have the Patients and Consumers Working Party, which I mentioned in the timeline. And we've also have a parallel Healthcare Professionals Working Party, which was created based on the success of the Patients and Consumers Working Party. So this working party has existed since 2006, but actually existed before as a working group. And here we have 22 members of the working party. Now, the working party members are actually the organizations. And the organizations that make up the working parties have to comply with certain criteria in order to achieve what we call eligibility. And the criteria are available on our website. And if you are interested, I can provide that information. But the criteria basically are that you have to be an organization that's interested in medicines, that represents patients, that has patients in your governing board, that has certain transparency of funding, and that the funding does not exceed a certain proportion by pharmaceutical companies. So it is flexible, and we currently have, I think, around 37 eligible organizations, and 22 of those make up the Patients and Consumers Working Party. We meet usually 3 to 4 times a year. One of those times will be with all eligible organizations. And then we discuss everything basically. During a meeting of the Patients and Consumers Working Party, or PCWP, we'll discuss everything from COVID to the International Committee for Harmonization to the Black Triangle, anything to do with medicines and beyond. So they're very important. And also we hold meetings, joint meetings with the healthcare professionals as well, because they're two very different but complementary viewpoints, and it's very beneficial for these working parties and members to be talking to each other. So when we talk about then the next level, so far we've said that patients represent their community at these high level positions, they can represent their organizations. I should also say here, it's not just in the working party that patients represent their organizations, but when there's EMA consultations or if there's workshops, then people are there invited to represent their organization. But here there's certain activities where people are invited as an individual. And here you're representing yourself and your experience with the disease, either as a patient or as a carer, and that's very important. And these are really on medicine-specific activities. So I think what's important is that the working party does not work on confidential or medicine-related activity. I mean, they do generally, but not medicine-specific. Whereas in these activities, such as scientific advice or the scientific advisory groups or consultations by the committees, or when you're reviewing a document, which we'll talk about before the end of the day, then there you are representing yourself as an individual. And here you will have to complete a declaration of interest form, which I believe Erna will be talking to you about later. You are welcome also to register as an individual patient. So here it's just a form you fill out online. And if you are interested in being involved more with EMA or receiving some information when there's consultations or specific information we email with our database, then you can register here. And this link, I believe that will also be discussed a little bit later, but this link is also in the slides, and please don't hesitate to join up. You don't have to sign a declaration of interest at this point. You can just register to say you're interested in receiving more information from EMA. So Isabel, I hope I'm doing okay for time. I'll keep going if that's okay.
You are, certainly, yes.
Great, great. Okay, so now we'll speak more specifically about some of the committees and where patients are involved in all of these committees. But what I'd like to show you in this diagram is the journey of a medicine. And you have the three broad phases of the medicine development. So you have the early dialogue in medicine development, the authorization, the evaluation for authorization, and then you have the safety monitoring. So very broadly in these, what we call our cards, you can see all the activities that occur under early dialogue. So you have the Committee for Orphan Medicines, the Advanced Therapies and Pediatric Committee are all under the early dialogue. And then we have the Scientific Advice Working Party as well. And here in all of these activities, patients are involved. In the authorization element, you have the Human Medicines Committee, again, the advanced therapy and the safety. And you can see that there's all of these activities as well where patients can be involved, including the scientific advisory group. So I'll talk about scientific advice and scientific advisory groups in the next presentation. And then in the continuous monitoring as well, you still have the human medicines, the advanced therapies and the safety committee. And again, we have different ways that patients can be involved, such as in the scientific advisory groups and also the public hearings that I mentioned before. So let's take these one by one. So we're going to use the example of an orphan medicine or medicine for a rare disease. And so here we have what I've done in the blue box. These are the activities of the committee, and in the red box, you have how patients are involved. So when a medicine comes to the orphan committee, it has to be it has to fill certain criteria as well. So for example, there has to be a prevalence of that disease of less than 5 in 10,000 in the European population. It has to be life-threatening or seriously debilitating as a condition. And then the designation of the medicine is that there's no existing medicine on the market, or that it's plausible, that it works. And the committee is really a gate opener at this very early stage. They can say, yes, we believe that this, we're convinced by the science that this medicine could work in this way. They don't even have to show that it has worked. But when they come back later, and I'll talk to you about that, that they have to then show that the medicine does work. But at this early stage, it's very much a door opener to pharmaceutical companies, because, or even patients have had orphan designations when they have a medicine that they're bringing forward. Patient groups have done that, and that's a nice story I can tell you a bit about if you'd like to know. But otherwise, this is very much a door opening committee. Patient involvement includes, as I've said, that they're members of the committee, that patients can be invited to attend a committee meeting, or we use surveys a lot as well in order to get the number of voices increased of patients with this, or carers with these particular conditions. The next committee in the list is the advanced therapy, and here the committee evaluates whether a particular medicine actually is an advanced therapy. But this committee is also special in that it can also give a recommendation for authorization. So this was in addition to the Human Medicines Committee, the CAT can also do that. Once again, we have patient members of the committee. Patients can be invited to the committee meeting, or we can use surveys. Moving along, we also have the pediatric committee. Now, this is an interesting committee because of the regulations. So when a medicine comes to the agency, when a company developing a medicine decides to come to the agency, to EMA for authorization, firstly, they don't need to go through these first two committees. Well, they don't need to go to the comp. So if you have a medicine for a rare disease that you're developing, you do not need to go to the comp, to the orphan committee. This is a choice, and some companies choose not to do that. I'm not quite sure why they would choose not to do that, but because there's certain incentives that a company will get, such as fee waivers, market protection, but you don't have to do this. You don't have to go to the comp, even if you're developing a medicine for a rare disease. It is beneficial, but they don't always do that. If it is an advanced therapy, it is better for the committee to give it a classification. The Advanced Therapy Committee will give it a classification, and this is also beneficial for the company. But here, when you come to medicines for children, it is in the regulation that it is mandatory to submit what is called a pediatric investigation plan. So you have to show that you either are planning on doing studies in children, or that your disease does not affect children. And so in this case, you get a waiver. So say, for example, just theoretically speaking, something like prostate cancer, they can get a waiver for children because prostate cancer does not typically occur in children. So you can see that the pediatric committee will assess what's called the pediatric investigation plan, and they have to determine the studies that the companies must perform in children, or they extrapolate the data. But this is very important. And also at EMA, we're trying to work more with people less than 18 years of age. So we have developed a document about involving young people in EMA activities, and that is also linked here. And if you're interested, you can read that. Excuse me. So once again, patients are members of the committee. They can be invited to a committee, or we can use surveys. You can see a pattern emerging here. So the safety committee, and you'll remember this happens here during the safety monitoring of medicines. Again, I've skipped the CHMP only because there's no patients there, but I will come back to that later. So the safety committee, or the pharmacovigilance risk assessment, here it's very important. They evaluate the risk management plan that's submitted with the marketing authorization. They look at any possible known or potential safety concerns. It's important to know how the risk is going to be managed and what information is going to be gathered later. So again, I won't say much about this committee because Sabina Strauss will kindly talk to you about that committee, and she's the committee chair, so she's the best place to talk about this. So again, we have patients as members. Patients can be invited to the committee meeting. You have also the public hearings that I've mentioned, and the stakeholder meetings, multi-stakeholder meetings to discuss specific aspects, and then we can also use surveys. So I have added the CHMP here. It's slightly out of order only because I wanted to deal with the patient, the committees where the patients are members first. And here, so when a company says we're ready to submit a marketing authorization, it will be submitted, and it is the CHMP, or the Committee for Human Medicinal Products, that evaluates the medicine on the basis of safety and efficacy, so risk and benefit. And this is really an important element. And so patients are invited. The patients are not members of this committee, but more and more we're determining different ways where patients can be involved. And so patients can be invited to a committee meeting. We also have these expert group meetings, the SAG or ad hoc, where patients can participate, where they are systematically invited to participate. And also we use surveys to capture a lot of patient input to give to the committee to feed into their evaluations. And all along the way, there are documents that that are prepared for the patient. So you would have seen this also with the Committee for Orphan Drugs. When there's an orphan designation, you have a public summary of opinion, which is written in lay language. Where you have a PDCO, there's the pediatric investigation plan. This is not written strictly for patients, but the information does exist. And then when you have the medicine that's been authorized, you have what's called a medicine overview, which is written in lay language for patients, and it follows a strict formula of what is the medicine, how can it be used, which indication is it used for, what's the stage of development, etc., etc.